How terrible a world would look like where the air is so thick with pollution that the sun's rays struggle to penetrate through the smog, where glaciers that have stood for millennia melt away in a matter of decades, and where once fertile lands transform into deserts, unable to sustain life. This isn't a scene from a dystopian novel. It's the reality we are inching towards due to climate change. But what if I told you that this impending catastrophe is not a natural occurrence, but a consequence of our own actions? Picture a planet where the balance of nature has been tipped by human hands, leading to unprecedented weather patterns and catastrophic environmental changes. Are we, as a species, truly capable of altering the very climate of our world? Join me on a journey through compelling scientific evidence, eye-opening data, and powerful ethical arguments as we uncover the undeniable truth. Climate change is primarily driven by human activity. The fate of our planet lies in our hands. Let's explore how and why. Climate change, an issue that has been at the forefront of scientific discourse and policymaking for several decades, is primarily driven by human activity. This assertion is supported by a multitude of scientific evidence and research that points to human activities as the principal catalysts of the rapid changes in global climate patterns. Here, I will present a compelling and persuasive argument defending this position, drawing from various scientific, economic, and social perspectives. Scientific evidence. Greenhouse gas emissions. The most significant piece of evidence supporting the argument that climate change is primarily driven by human activity is the dramatic increase in greenhouse gas (GHG) emissions since the Industrial Revolution. Carbon dioxide (CO2), methane (CH4), and nitrous oxide (N2O) are the primary greenhouse gases released through human activities such as burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and industrial processes. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased by more than 40% since pre-industrial times, primarily due to the combustion of fossil fuels and changes in land use. This rise in GHGs enhances the greenhouse effect, trapping more heat in the Earth's atmosphere and leading to global warming. The correlation between rising CO2 levels and global temperatures is well documented through ice core samples, which show a clear link between past CO2 concentrations and temperatures. Modern measurements, made possible through satellite technology and other advanced methods, reinforce this correlation and provide strong evidence that human activities are significantly contributing to climate change. Anthropogenic forcing. Anthropogenic forcing refers to the influence of human activities on the Earth's climate. The IPCC's reports consistently indicate that the primary drivers of recent climate change are anthropogenic. For example, the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report, 2014, states that it is extremely likely, 95,100% probability, that more than half of the observed increase in global average surface temperature from 1951 to 2010 was caused by human activities. Human-induced factors include fossil fuel combustion. The burning of coal, oil, and natural gas for energy and transportation is the largest source of CO2 emissions. Deforestation. The clearing of forests for agriculture and urban development reduces the number of trees that can absorb CO2, thereby increasing atmospheric CO2 levels. Agriculture. Agricultural practices, including rice cultivation and livestock farming, produce significant amounts of methane and nitrous oxide. Industrial processes. Various industrial activities release greenhouse gases and pollutants that contribute to global warming. These activities lead to a net increase in radiative forcing, which is the difference between the sunlight absorbed by the Earth and the energy radiated back to space. Positive radiative forcing leads to warming, and the evidence shows that human activities have increased positive radiative forcing, contributing to global temperature rise. Observational data. Temperature records. Temperature records from around the world show a clear warming trend over the past century. According to NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, the average global temperature has increased by about 1.2 degrees Celsius, 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit, since the late 19th century, with most of this warming occurring in the past 35 years. The last decade has been the warmest on record, with 2016 and 2020 tying as the hottest years. The geographical distribution of warming also aligns with human activity. Urban areas, which are centers of industrial activity and fossil fuel consumption, often experience higher temperature increases compared to rural areas, a phenomenon known as the urban heat island effect. This localized warming is a direct consequence of human activity and further supports the argument that human-induced factors are driving global climate change. Oceanic changes. The world's oceans are also experiencing significant changes due to human activity. Oceans absorb about 90% of the excess heat generated by greenhouse gas emissions, leading to an increase in sea surface temperatures. This warming contributes to the melting of polar ice caps and glaciers, which in turn raises sea levels. Furthermore, the absorption of CO2 by oceans leads to ocean acidification, which has detrimental effects on marine ecosystems, particularly coral reefs and shellfish. The rapid rate of acidification is unprecedented in the geological record and is a clear indicator of human impact on the environment. Attribution studies. Attribution studies aim to distinguish the contributions of natural and human factors to observed climate changes. These studies utilize climate models to simulate the Earth's climate under different scenarios, isolating the effects of natural factors, such as solar variability and volcanic activity, from anthropogenic influences. One of the key findings from attribution studies is that natural factors alone cannot account for the observed warming trend over the past century. For instance, the slight cooling effect of volcanic eruptions and the relatively stable output of solar radiation cannot explain the significant increase in global temperatures. When human factors, particularly greenhouse gas emissions, are included in the models, the simulations closely match the observed temperature record, providing strong evidence that human activities are the primary driver of recent climate change. Economic and social dimensions. Industrialization and urbanization. The global industrialization and urbanization processes have significantly altered the natural landscape, contributing to climate change. The expansion of cities and infrastructure requires large amounts of energy, predominantly sourced from fossil fuels. The construction industry itself is a major emitter of CO2, from the production of cement and steel to the energy required for construction activities. Urbanization also contributes to changes in land use, often leading to deforestation and the conversion of natural habitats into agricultural or urban areas. These changes not only reduce the Earth's capacity to absorb CO2 but also increase the emissions of greenhouse gases through activities such as transportation, heating, and cooling. Agricultural practices. Modern agricultural practices are another significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. The use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, mechanized farming, and large-scale animal husbandry all contribute to the release of CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. Methane emissions from livestock and rice paddies, in particular, are potent greenhouse gases with a much higher global warming potential than CO2. Additionally, the clearing of forests for agriculture reduces the number of trees that can absorb CO2, exacerbating the problem. The impact of these practices on the climate is substantial, and they are driven by the increasing demand for food and agricultural products due to population growth and changing dietary patterns. Ethical and moral considerations. Intergenerational equity. One of the most compelling ethical arguments for addressing human-induced climate change is the concept of intergenerational equity. The actions of the current generation have significant implications for future generations. By continuing to emit greenhouse gases at current rates, we are imposing severe environmental, economic, and social burdens on future generations. The principle of intergenerational equity argues that we have a moral obligation to protect the environment and ensure that future generations inherit a planet capable of sustaining life and providing for their needs. Failing to address human-induced climate change violates this ethical principle and places the well-being of future generations at risk. Global inequality. Climate change disproportionately affects the most vulnerable populations, particularly those in developing countries. These communities often lack the resources and infrastructure to adapt to changing climate conditions, making them more susceptible to the impacts of extreme weather events, sea level rise, and food insecurity. Developed countries, which have historically contributed the most to greenhouse gas emissions, have a moral responsibility to lead the efforts in mitigating climate change and supporting adaptation measures in developing countries. This includes reducing emissions, transferring clean technology, and providing financial assistance to help vulnerable communities cope with the impacts of climate change. Counterarguments and rebuttals. Natural climate variability. Some skeptics argue that natural climate variability, such as changes in solar radiation or volcanic activity, could be responsible for the observed warming. While it is true that natural factors do influence the Earth's climate, the magnitude and rate of the current warming trend cannot be explained by natural variability alone. Studies have shown that the contribution of natural factors to recent climate change is relatively small compared to the impact of human activities. For instance, the slight cooling effect of volcanic eruptions and the stable output of solar radiation over the past few decades cannot account for the significant increase in global temperatures. When human factors are included in climate models, the simulations closely match the observed temperature record, providing strong evidence that human activities are the primary driver of recent climate change. Technological advancements. Another argument posited by skeptics is that technological advancements and increased efficiency can mitigate the effects of climate change without significant changes to current lifestyles or economic systems. While technological innovation is indeed crucial for addressing climate change, relying solely on technology without reducing greenhouse gas emissions is insufficient. Renewable energy sources, energy-efficient technologies, and carbon capture and storage (CCS) are important tools in the fight against climate change. However, their deployment must be accompanied by systemic changes in energy consumption patterns, land use, and economic policies to achieve meaningful reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Technological solutions alone cannot compensate for the continued high levels of emissions from fossil fuel use and deforestation. Conclusion. The overwhelming body of scientific evidence supports the conclusion that climate change is primarily driven by human activity. The significant increase in greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel combustion, deforestation, and industrial processes has enhanced the greenhouse effect, leading to global warming and changes in climate patterns. Observational data, climate models, and attribution studies consistently point to human activities as the main drivers of recent climate change. Addressing human-induced climate change requires a multifaceted approach, involving technological innovation, policy measures, and ethical considerations. It is imperative that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, transition to sustainable energy sources, and adopt practices that protect the environment for future generations. Failing to do so not only jeopardizes the health and well-being of the planet but also imposes significant moral and ethical burdens on the most vulnerable populations and future generations. By acknowledging and addressing the human causes of climate change, we can take meaningful steps towards a more sustainable and equitable future. This responsibility falls on individuals, communities, businesses, and governments alike, requiring collective action and a commitment to preserving the Earth's climate for the benefit of all.